I want to say a couple thank yous, and I want to introduce our guest for this week. Just, you know, we're really flattered that this thing has taken off. I was asked by Echo Marketing to do this about 6 months ago. And as you go back, we're getting between 500 and 600 people listening to this each month. I run into colleagues of mine. I just got an email last night from somebody that said, you know, I love your podcast. They're awesome. A couple things about them. You know, we encourage you to send questions in, and I'll try to answer them on the next podcast. And I think what people love about it is there is no industry bias. And I gave a talk at our society meeting last year. We closed doors to industry, and people came up afterwards and were like, thank you so much. I really appreciate not having, because as you know, at the big meetings where there's industry there and people at the podium, people are worried about saying what they really mean and what they really feel about it. So as those of you who know me know, I'm, you know, passionate about teaching the business of aesthetic medicine. And so this week we have a surprise guest, and I say surprise because I've known Lou for, I think it's about 15 years now, as a real industry leader. And I had the topic scheduled, you know, how to build a high performance team so that you can have exponential growth. And that was the topic of this week. So we're going to bump that off until next month. But Lou and I just came across each other, and we messaged back and forth, and I thought, oh my God, he'd be an awesome person to have on the podcast. For people who want to know more about this, I've actually written a book too. It's called The White Coat Entrepreneur, which is going to be out in the next couple of months. On that, it's basically mastering business so you can work less, earn more, and exit successfully while maintaining life balance, which we know is a challenge for a lot of doctors. So our next podcast is on September 19th, which, as I said, is going to be how to have exponential growth by building a high performance team. But I don't want to hold off any longer. I really want to introduce Lou. And so let me just tell you a little bit about, for those who don't know Mr. Frisina. He is, for those of us who have gray hair, like myself, he truly is an icon in our specialty. Because he's been around a long time. Lou is basically, and I'm going to read a little bit of this, it's because I asked him for his bio, but I know most of this anyway. He's a 35-year-old biotech and medical device veteran and a serial entrepreneur in the aesthetic space. He built and sold 4 medical ventures, including the sale of the game changer dermal filler, which we all know is Restylane, and he sold that for $260 million. And he'll tell the year when he tells our story. He's president of Fisher Scientific, which is a New York Stock Exchange company, sold to Thermo, and he currently does business in the consulting area of the aesthetic and medical practices throughout the country. He's an advisor to private equity, hedge funds, involved in the investment in the M&A area of these transactions. Paying forward, he speaks worldwide on best practices and buying and selling of companies and medical practices. He graduated summa cum laude from Dartmouth, and he received his MPA from Harvard. And he currently resides in Miami Beach, although yesterday or earlier in the week I was talking to him. He said he's on the road most of the time. So welcome, Lou. I'm really thrilled to have you here. I want to tell people who are listening that you actually personally had an impact, and I make reference to it all the time when I'm talking, in my career around 2005. You remember that meeting, right?
I do remember that.
So yeah, he kind of slapped me around a little bit and said, you need to stop. You need to create a business for yourself here. You've just basically got a job. You know, you're a job where you're employing yourself. Wasn't it something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. So, you know, with that introduction, Lou, I want to just, I want to ask you a few questions that I think our audience would be interested in. You have such insight into the aesthetic space. So I want to pick your brain too. And because again, the beauty of this is you don't work for some company trying to sell something. So you can kind of give your unbiased opinion of things. So I was curious, as I've gotten to know you, from the time you pulled up here in your big Humvee, right? You still have one of those?
No, I moved to Florida. You don't need that anymore.
Anyway, you remember that, right?
I do.
Your son. So, how did you become interested? I mean, you were smarty pants from graduated from Harvard, and how did you become interested in the aesthetic business? I'm really curious.
Yeah, I did. Thanks for asking, and thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to be here, and also at my time, I like being able to pay forward. So, after somewhat of a career in consulting and working for large companies, was the president of Fisher Scientific for a number of years and so forth, I got interested in women's health care. I was looking at markets that were attractive and growing, but were more about quality of life than about, mortality of life. And I was involved in a lot of that in previous pharma and biotech scenarios. So I actually got involved with a company, a Swiss pharmaceutical company that actually made something called gonadotropins that was involved in the area of infertility. And we grew that business from about $250 to $750 million in about 3 years on a worldwide basis. And it was obviously at the point in time when women were getting older and they were getting married later and they were having children later. And obviously after 35, running into, various fertility related issues. And so was involved in that for many years. We ended up selling that company for about $10 billion. And yet I was still interested in women's healthcare. So
what year was that, Lou?
That was, let's see, that was in, oh my God.
Just ballpark. I'm just curious.
1986 to 1990.
Okay.
So it was a long time ago. And then I did a number of consulting work for a bunch of private equity and hedge funds and things like that. And I continued to look for women's healthcare opportunities. I finally went to a friend of mine who was the head of research in Morgan Stanley in New York. And I said, Ram, I'm looking for something in the area of women's healthcare. I don't want it to be insurance-based because Hillary at the time, even though she was just the wife of the president, was scaring all of us in terms of
I remember that.
starting to kind of crunch down on the pharma industry.
That was about 93.
Yeah, that was exactly at that time. And so I said, don't want to be insurance-based, want it to be about quality of life. And so, he said, let me get on my research team. And they spent about 3 weeks. He called me down back to New York and he said, there's this product that's in cosmetics or aesthetics, but it's not skincare, it's an injectable. I said, what are you talking about? He said, look, I think the best thing for you to do is to buy either a one-way or a two-way ticket down to Brazil, and that's where you find the product. So I got into a plane, went down to Brazil, into the rainforest. There was actually a plastic surgery meeting going on there. And, this is in 1997, 1998. And in a smoke-filled, and the smoke was cigarette smoke from plastic surgeons in the exhibit hall, as things go in the old days.
Oh, yeah.
And I waited for, I described myself wading through a crowd that was behind one booth. And there was Restylane. And I said, what Brazilian company, manufactures this? Obviously there's a lot of interest here on that. And they said, it's not a Brazilian company, it's a Swedish company. And it was like, where in the world was Waldo? And I bought another ticket up to Uppsala, Sweden, and met with the chairman of QMed, who's the manufacturer of Restylane. And that started the conversation. But I was looking for something that was game-changing. And for those of you who have only been recently in the industry, and Ed would remember that there was a company called Collagen Corp, which was out in California. They had a closed herd of cows that actually was sitting on what we now know was about $400 million worth of land that they ended up selling after Collagen Corp no longer existed. And it was a cow-based product, and it required double sensitivity tests and only lasted 3 months. And yet there was an extremely large interest in, you know, in women's aesthetics and, you know, obviously in rejuvenation and, you know, all of the things that we now know about. And I saw an opportunity with this technology. I'm a very evidence science based type of a guy. Wasn't a doctor, but, you know, knew enough about the technology to realize this could be game changing, and then started the process of evaluating the product and then subsequently taking it through the FDA.
Got it. You know, so for those of us, I just saw a patient yesterday that I used to inject collagen in, and she says, "Do you remember when you?"
Zyderm or Zyplast?
I think it was Zyplast. I mean, you had to test. Actually, they recommended you test them twice. No one did that. Remember that, right?
Yeah.
But she said to me, she goes, "I remember it used to hurt like hell when you injected my lips." And I said, "Yeah, you know, that's all we had." And in fact, in the late 90s, I remember my wife talking to me, and I said, "This Botox thing," I'm like, "I'm not going to do that stuff. I mean, I'm a surgeon, you know, I'm not going to inject patients with that. That's a fad, you know." Clearly you saw something that other people didn't. So when you were, I'm just curious, because Restylane, as we know, and we're going to talk about this in a bit, but there are so many HAs out there, right? But Restylane, it was either brilliance or luck, right? When I think of it, if I saw this clear gel and I were you, I'd be like, I don't know. I mean, you saw something there.
Yes, I mean, you know, again, being scientific evidence-based, I actually took it to an independent laboratory, evaluated it for purity, evaluated it for a number of aspects, because remember, I was in the pharma and biotech industry, and they do a fairly rigorous testing on that. But, you know, the proof in the pudding was that, you know, was finding out who the key opinion leaders were at the time, you know, including yourself, and going out and talking to them, and actually, you know, putting together a little program where I was able to literally drop samples off at that time. Not so sure that's something you could do in the new world, but at the time we did that. And because they really weren't sure what the designation of the product was. In any case, I had an opportunity. There were two very important key opinion leaders. Both have now passed away in the aesthetic industry. One on the West Coast, and
I didn't talk about it. Larry was one.
Yeah, Arnie Klein, and then the second one in Miami Beach, of course, was Fred Brandt. And all I could tell you is they felt like I was coming from another planet. Here are the two largest users of, you know, an injectable from collagen core, and without getting into the nitty-gritty details and the words they use, the overall response was, "How dare you come into my practice, you little, you know, snuffy kid from Boston and from Harvard and so forth, telling me that you have something that, you know, can be game-changing and would fundamentally change my practice." And I wasn't as strong as they came about, but the bottom line is, you know, I was coming in and basically challenging what they were using and saying that I had, you know, a better product. And I said,
"But you did. I mean, think of this: having to test a patient twice and bring them back a month apart, and then finally you can inject them. That's just not it, right?"
I mean, there were just fundamental things that from a unique, you know, product proposition, you know, just didn't make any sense to me. And, you know, and also, you know, which we all forget about, because it was bovine collagen, you know, there was about a 7 to a 15% adverse event. Sometimes there was even delayed hypersensitivity when, you know, it could come back. And there was even a point, there was a 60-minute thing that happened where they thought that it might have had even a negative immunological response. So, I mean, there was enough negative things associated with it that relative to this product and its configuration, its characteristics and so forth, the fact that it was made from, you know, a bug versus an animal, the fact that the DNA was closer to humans versus, you know, versus what the bovine collagen was, at least suggested to me that there was a possibility of this. And so I invested significantly a lot of my money and time. I took 2 years off. You know, I moved away from the corporate world and, you know, put together a medical advisory board, put together all the FDA requirements, which I was used to in the pharma and biotech area, and did the trials. And within the first year, we took 87% of bovine collagen share, and
Sure.
not intentionally, but effectively bankrupt the company.
Yeah. So where did Medicis come in?
So what happened was, this is a very interesting story. I went to I was working with QMed, and had the rights to bring it to the United States, and talked to a number of doctors of getting involved and so forth. And there was a point in time, without getting, QMed was involved in another injectable product. Actually, it was for ACL in the knee, and they had spent a significant amount of money there. And what happened was, as things happen in pharmaceuticals, you do massive clinical research trials. They broke the code on that trial, and the product didn't work. And so the chairman of the company said, look, we're going to need to do something differently from a business development standpoint with the product. And so he said, you need to go out there and try to sell it to one of the other biopharm companies. And so the first company I actually went to, ironically, was Allergan. And, there's a long story behind that, but the short story is what I call deer in the headlights. Not the first time and not the last time I'll ever see that, where I said, and at the time, Botox was, in the late 90s, was really relegated to the eyes and above, right, Ed? It wasn't really being used in the lower face. That was a development that happened in the 2000s, with the brothers and others. And so I said, look, you guys are the leaders from the eyes up, and I believe that this product will be the leader from the eyes down. It was like deer in the headlights. I mean, I literally had to say it twice to them, and they just didn't get it. And they were the perfect company to get it. Subsequently, they obviously came into the market with Juvederm on a second play, and subsequently took over the market. But the bottom line is that didn't work. I, basically started to go down the list. And Medicis, who had a number of dermatological products that were basically going off patent and were getting old and going through their, traditional life cycle. They didn't have, some of the new minocyclines that they had out, way out in, 2010, 2011 finally. But they were having aging products. And sat down with Jonah Shacknai at the time, chairman and CEO of Medicis. And in about a 3 or 4 month period of time, we put together a deal. And I hung around there for about 3 or 4 years, helping them, further develop the business. They were a medical dermatology company, so they didn't understand aesthetics and the aesthetic providers and the key opinion leaders. And obviously the rest is history. Got it.
So, I mean, think about that as a prediction. I look back at even Botox and thinking it was going to be a fad. There have been incredible changes in this industry, right, over the past 35 years. And it's interesting when I talk to young folks who've been in it 5 or 6 or 7 years, they don't know anything other than that. So talk to me about the changes the things that you find fascinating in this industry over the past, maybe 20 or 30 years. I mean, what do you think about all this?
Well,
the companies, the providers, all of that,
I think there was a little hiatus in the development of the business. And we all, for those who didn't go through it, we had a recession, in 2007, 2008. And for about a 5-year period of time, that actually created a real kibosh. When you're unfortunately in corporate America, where we have public companies that are stockholders versus stakeholders, the first thing that they cut out in a recession or in a downturn is research and development. And so I believe in that 5-year period of time, we lost a lot of headways. Coming out of 2011, 2012, you started to see increasing development in obviously the neurotoxins, in some of the HAs, but also, as importantly or more importantly, in some of the non-invasive equipment that we all know now, like the cool sculpting and a lot of the new and advanced laser technology. So that was a little of a hiatus in our development and growth and so forth. But what happened, starting in 2003 for the
don't interrupt you 1 second, but I find this interesting because from 2008, right, the Great Recession, Surgery dropped 25, 30%. Yet, even though you're telling me that the R&D money, and they dried up, right? And so the new products dried up, but the consumers were using, I mean, the non-surgical market grew between 12 and 15%.
Right.
Throughout that time, people were still getting injections. They were just cutting out the surgery.
Right. And I was going to get to that. So what happened was the big ticket items like surgery, and I had, for those who were young and in the market now, and didn't go through that, I had major people in the world, crying on the phone. Had not had in New York, in Los Angeles, in Dallas, in Chicago, had nobody coming in for surgical consults. And, my best advice to them is I said, there are people with disposable income. Aesthetics is still important to them. Wrinkles and involution and gravity are still taking place on people's faces and bodies and so forth. It might be better to go to a lower ticket item, such as the injectables and some of the other procedures, and see if we can weather the storm. And for the smart, and there were some very, very smart practices out there, like yourself and others that, became friends of mine and so forth, and put their egos aside as surgeons. And,
That's
and
the problem,
what they trained, for 12 or 14 years. It's a hard thing to do. This is what they trained for. This is what, they countless years and countless nights and, overnights and sleepless nights and sleepless weeks and so forth, to say, you want me to relegate doing an injectable? I mean, I'm a world-class surgeon and so forth. I said, I don't have any other answers. All I can tell you is this may develop a cohort of patients that you can, at the right time, recessions, we all go through cyclical cycles. We may be going through another pending recession over the next couple of years. Who knows?
Who knows,
This is a way of weathering the storm. And so the smart practices did that. And they were able to bring in those patients, continuing to bring in those patients with obviously products like Restylane and Botox at the time that were high-performing products and worked. And therefore the viral network, continued at that time more on a word-of-mouth basis than, what we have today in social media on a digital marketing standpoint.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting because now people might not believe it, but I remember colleagues of mine saying, I'm not injecting patients. I'm a surgeon. This is bullshit. I mean, why would I stoop that low to inject patients? And, for those of us who have been successful at it, I personally don't inject patients, but I was smart enough at least to embrace the whole thing and scale that up so that it would feed the practice.
And that's a good point though, because even that experience, works well today. There are not, at 23 years of old, God help them and God bless them, they're not ready for facelifts or, hopefully liposuction or other facial or body or ophthalmological procedures and so forth. But at some point in time, aging, and we all age, and, I feel the effects of that now 30-something years later in my career, they're going to become candidates. So you're building, and I work with practices all the time, build a non-surgical. It is a future cohort of surgical candidates that you now have a captive audience with. And keep them in your practice, keep them out of the practices in and around you, and just have some level of patience, because they will inevitably and have to turn into surgical candidates, at the right time and when financially, when they're ready to do that.
And we don't want to push that. I mean, what I told my colleagues, because people would, so I've heard this so many times, Lou, my patients won't put up with, I have to inject them, and I don't buy that, because I remember once upon a time when my patient care coordinator, this is like 12 years ago, said, Dr. Williams, Mrs. So-and-so, you've always injected her. What do I tell her? And I say, tell her Dr. Williams doesn't do that anymore. Because we had, we were at that point scaling up. But the bright side, as you said, if you're patient and wait long enough and build that, so to me, that's the whole reason to be very successful at that. is because now someone comes up and I say, okay, Mrs. Smith, why a facelift now? And she says, well, as you know, I'm a patient of your Rejuva Center, and Linda tells me it's time. So that's a really easy consult, right? Compared to, so it's imperative that we learn how to do this and scale it up. What do you think about? What do you make of all the the different neurotoxins now? It's crazy, right? Just the last year and a half or so, I got colleagues of mine calling me saying, "What do you think about this? What do you think about this? How do you think this is going to affect practices? How do you think this is going to affect the market?" I'm curious.
Well, I think it's good for I think it's good for a balanced an economy. Having it's, for lack of a better word, a dominant product or a single product in the marketplace is never good. And we know that in the pharma industry as well. And thank God we have the FDA that encourages other products, to come into the markets as long as they're safety and, as long as they're safe and efficacious and so on. Ed, I went to the IMCAST meeting, which is a big international aesthetics meeting over in Paris, unfortunately at the end of July, but a great meeting as it is. And every year I get to count up the number of fillers that are in them. I think they're up to about 167.
Crazy, right?
And so forth. And over in Europe, some of these products are going for, $50, $60, $70, and they're all high quality, and they're all made by, highly efficient, state-of-the-art, manufacturing facilities and everything else. And I think that's going to, that I knew eventually was going to impact something that takes a little more of a regulatory and a clinical research and development effort with the neurotoxins. It was just a matter of time. And and for those of you who don't know, and this is, to the benefit of, of South Korea, most of these neurotoxins are coming out of there. Allergan bought another neurotoxin besides the one it has right now. It's put it on the shelf. There was a group called Strathspey Crown that had, bought, a product from a pharmaceutical company, which is now Jeuveau. There is another neurotoxin over there from Hugel that's in FDA development, and hopefully will be out over the next couple of years. And then, of course, there's Revance Therapeutics. Revance is an interesting story because they actually started their whole development with a topical neurotoxin, which is an extraordinarily difficult thing because you're trying to get a protein, transdermally through the skin. That's a hard thing to do. And, eventually found out, I think, as we all kind of predicted, that the amount of material and the cost of that material to get to the skin would be, almost, cost prohibitive. So what they did have was access to a great neurotoxin, have put it through clinical trials. And, at least from what I'm hearing right now, everybody is trying to get to what, and the current neurotoxins out there, with the exception of Jeuveau, are not 900 kilodalton equivalent neurotoxins like Botox. Jeuveau fits that, and a couple of the other ones that are coming out fit that criteria. And so you'll have a true, I wouldn't use the word generic, but you'll have a true competitive, substantially equivalent product that, you can use on your patients with probably, and we're all watching with these clinical trials, at least, equal to and maybe greater either onset or longevity or persistence with these products. So I'm excited about that. It's not abnormal to have multiple product offerings. We were left with, Zyderm and Zyplast for almost 15 years, and left with Botox for almost the same, actually more time than that. And as markets develop and as they obviously are attractive to pharmaceutical companies like aesthetics are, and it's a testimony to the market that we're in, because people aren't going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars of development and licensing rights and clinical trials and going through the hassle of the FDA and the regulatory environment if they didn't think it was worth it. So I'm excited about that. I think it will. I think it will allow for lower pricing as competition does, and in any type of a democratic type of a marketplace, a non-monopolistic market. And I think we'll see an expansion of the use. A lot of people talk about we've only still hit about 20 or 25%. We're still at the tip of the iceberg of the aesthetic market. There are a lot of people who haven't crossed the either the needle barrier,
Right.
versus topicals, and or the price barrier. And I think it will become more affordable and more broadly used and accepted.
No
through
question.
social media, through digital marketing, and everything else. And
Yeah,
so forth. I'm a happy camper for everybody.
An epiphany for me was how just mainstream this is. Now, we would go as a practice to health fairs. I didn't go, but our team went. And just 10 years, maybe a little more than 10 years ago, and people would say, well, I don't even want to talk about that. That's like poison. And then I got a 28-year-old, and she's pretty straightforward, kind of salt of the earth, not someone who's worried about what she looks like all the time. She's a hard worker. She's beautiful, but that's not her thing. And she, at the age of 27 or something, a couple of years ago, was like, Dad, I seriously need Botox. I mean, to hear my daughter, who's 27, say that to me, when, 10 years ago we were told it was poison, get away from me, makes you realize the opportunity there. So let me ask you, you kind of weighed in on the neurotoxins. Let me hear your thoughts, because I have an opinion on, where's the market going with regard to Kybella? What are your thoughts on that whole thing?
With Kybella specifically?
Yeah, specifically. I mean,
okay. So
I think it was Sanders made it.
This is like a classic Harvard Business School case study. So yeah. I followed Kybella. It used to be called ATX 101.
Yeah. And
it was from Kythera, which is the name of
the company.
The start of the startup company and so on. And I was very excited about it. I mean, they basically took the detergent out of the product and left the good stuff in, for a lack of a better word, to keep it simple and so forth. Obviously, they started to get courted as they started to go through their, the development and started to go through the clinical trials. And then, of course, Allergan came in, as a leader should in any industry, not leaving the door cracked open for anyone, whether you're a provider or you're a company. You don't leave that door cracked open as the leader. And you should be in the position and afford to be able to take the risk of making that additional investment. And it was a calculated risk. It was a product that I was actually a big fan of and so forth. Two things happened. One is they spent $1 billion on this product, to buy it. That's a lot of money.
I think it was 2.1.
Well, it might even have been more of that. It was way over, in my estimate, what anyone should have been able to do. But
I agree.
But what it forced, which is and I'm a little disappointed. What it forced is, and especially as a public company, is the ability to repay that investment, whether it's $1 billion, $2 billion, or $5 billion. So what did they do? They made the wrong mistake, and they priced it at a price point. First of all, it was supposed to be a lot less treatments. They priced it at $650, to the cost of the physician, or $450 or whatever. And then it required multiple treatments, basically, targeted for the double chin, right? That was kind of its claim to fame. And of course, as a facial plastic surgeon or as a general plastic surgeon, you can do some liposucking out for about, a little more than $1,000 and a little more than 5 or 10 minutes. And so they made it, economically disadvantageous for doctors to be able to promote that. And then secondly, what happened is a lot of patients were not able to get over that initial reaction of the product. Here you're trying to get rid of, a double chin, and on the first injections, you end up with a frog the size of a turkey, and people didn't manage that expectation. So between the managing of the, the turkey expectation, and quite frankly, in my mind, the prohibitive cost, they just made a bad marketing decision, in my opinion. And I was very
Completely agree.
disappointed.
I think it was not only a bad
Because I believe the product has tremendous potential, but
potential.
now, now it's 9 steps backwards.
Right.
And even some of the people, quite frankly, who are on some of the medical advisory boards of this type of product, and others are just not using it, for those types of reasons.
No, I mean, think about the potential. So first of all, I think they overpaid for it. Second of all, just as you said, the pricing was too high, and then it was a marketing disaster. I mean, think about the potential for plastic surgery, little touch up, rather than do a touch up light bulb on somebody. If you could economically inject this stuff, there's a huge market, right? We as a society are getting fat,
Right.
So, but anyway, so I'm just hearing some background noise there. Couple of, where do you see the industry going? Crystal ball. Tell people on this call or podcast, where do you see it going?
Okay. So, I'm in a fortunate position because, through my wrestling experience, I've actually seen over 2,000 medical aesthetic practices. I work with people anywhere from the United States all the way to China. And so I've got a pretty good handle in terms of what's going. First of all, I think there is, at last count, over 60,000 physicians in the United States that are playing around with these non-surgical products. And they're not in the core 4. We always used to talk about the core 4, the plastics, right, the facial plastics, the derms, and the ophthalmologists. That went out probably, in a relatively short period of time. That grew from 4 to most likely 15 or 20 other related specialists, general surgeons, and other general family practice and everything else. Wasn't helped by the fact that they were getting their butt kicked in by the insurance companies, not just in terms of reimbursement, but the amount of time and cost it would take them to get, reimbursement on a lousy derm or lousy, family practice.
I'll say it. The Affordable Care Act's a disaster, and that's a whole different conversation. But it's an absolute disaster for physicians.
Yeah, and it didn't work, and so people had to, I call it, repurpose, re-engineer, and transform. And so we had this explosion. There was a low barrier of entry getting into the market. You buy $5,000 worth of neurotoxins and fillers and so forth. You do a little marketing and you're in business. And so that increased the number of physicians out there. That gets me worried because a lot of them really don't have any place or purpose of doing this.
In fairness, though, to some of the non-core, I got to tell you, I've seen some really, really good non-cores, and I've seen some crappy plastic surgeons.
I will tell you that one of the best injectors in the world that I've ever seen is actually a nurse, and phenomenal at what she does. Her name will remain unnamed, but she knows who I'm talking about. And so, there's been this explosion, and, patients specifically have to be very careful about getting allured into social media or predominant digital marketing, and should be looking at patient testimonials, at MD reviews. They should be doing, before they go in, they should spend some time on the phone, understanding about the credentials of the practice, about the experience of the doctors performing these procedures, and to some extent get a real feel in terms of whether they're looking at this as a sustainable part of their business or something that they're just being opportunistic about. So that development happened over this period of time. But what has also happened, in the overall industry, because of the number of players that are out there, and now we have in various states the rights for nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and others going into business on their own, just with a medical director, and setting up literally a 400 square foot facility. There's nothing wrong with that, but again, what is it about their experience? What is it about their before and afters? You really have to take a rigorous look, and you've got to be a lot more discriminating as a patient moving forward in terms of doing this. We don't have to talk about cosmetic surgery, outside of the United States and the disasters that occurred. But we're starting to see a lot of that even in the non-surgical area. But what's happened as a consequence of that spread is increasing commoditization
Right.
of these products. I mean, I see Botox at $735 a unit. You're buying it, at list priced at about $6. Okay, maybe you're getting it for a little less, but there's not a lot of margin there. But of course, if you've only rented out something for $1,000, a month in terms of a lease, and your secretary is also your medical assistant, and you're doing enough volume, you can probably get away with that as well. So
I see a lot of them struggling though too, Lou. I mean,
but they create noise, and they
do.
They
And they
create
hurt.
noise and hiccups for you.
Yeah.
And they don't go away. That's the problem. The hiccups keep, one comes in, one comes out. Two come in, three go out. Four come in, five go out. And that's what's been happening. And so unfortunately, I feel that commoditization is occurring. Only with the best physicians like yourself, the ones who basically decided to go for quality, made the investments that you've made, struggled through, affording the financing and, the time, the sleepless nights that I'm sure you had, Ned, making those types of investments in your practice and the development and the support of all your employees and staff and everything. And a lot of these people don't necessarily understand that. I know that because I have these discussions in the evening, without significant others in the room and stuff like that. But those who have differentiated themselves on quality, on experience, and on specialization are the ones that are going to win. And from a service standpoint, you need to have what I call a USP, I call it a unique service proposition. You have to pick your poison. The broad general aesthetic provider is not going to survive much longer in this market. We've already seen that in plastic surgery. There are people who are world-class and go-to experts in breast augmentation. We know who they are. We know who they are in facial plastic surgery, such as yourself. We know who they are in terms of rhinoplasty, and those people are thriving and, of course, are demanding, as they should, premium pricing for their services and so forth. But for everyone else who has not picked their poison, whether it's the face or the body or a certain part of the face or part of their body, they're going to be struggling, and they're going to fall into what Stephen Crane called in his book, the vast blue regimen. And that's what, in that mediocrity and that kind of middle of the road and that gray area. And that's when you start running into problems as a provider, as an owner, in terms of profitability, in terms of sustainability. And then you start cutting corners in marketing, you start cutting corners in your staffing, you start making other quality cost, decisions that are not sustainable. And you both screw up your own practice as well as, hope to God, but I've seen it as well in the quality and delivery of these medical aesthetic services.
Yeah, no question. Bottom line is, we've learned this too. We will not compete on price and commodity pricing. We, what builds our business in with the highest retention is the customer experience and good quality care. Because you can't compete, and the people that do are trying to do this on commodity pricing are basically starving or struggling.
Right.
So talk to me briefly about, because I know I want to talk to you about private equity, because I know there were derm groups in 2016, 17 that were approached and bought at high multiples. So, why do you think that because I have my opinion, why do you think that whole thing failed?
I appreciate you using the word failure. I'm not sure it's failing with everyone. There are
shareholders.
There are dermatological groups out there that were given high multiples, 10 plus, 15 plus, and so forth. But we're able to consolidate. What we all suffer from in this industry is an enormous amount of duplicity. Honestly, We all have our own patient coordinators.
Yep.
We all have our own customer service. We have our own human resources. We have our own marketing groups and so forth. And the level of duplicity in any one single city or market is extraordinary. And there are parts of our industry, including group purchasing, including, corporate marketing and so forth, that do lend to, scale economies.
Yeah.
And so
what we pay for Botox is a hell of a lot less than the Medi
exactly
it's doing.
right. But I mean, if you're taking you're paying somebody for a social post, and you have not one office but 5 offices, that's getting to everyone out in the consumer market, and so there are scale economies in doing that. But it's a tricky wicket and so forth. I do believe that there is a feeding frenzy out there among the dermatology groups, because, there are some 800-pound gorillas. They're going into, they were in New York and California.
Oh, yeah.
And they're going into the secondary markets and, pushing their weight around. And, they are still buying things at heavy multiples. They're building up a liability that, could explode on them at some point in time. And again, I think private equity, and I spend a lot of time with them, are increasingly looking for specialists and specialty groups that might be, somewhat immune, somewhat, protected from commoditization or price sensitivity, or even costs and so forth. And so it's an evolving market. We're starting to see some consolidation, which has been, the herding of cats in derms has been a lot easier than with plastic surgeons and with facial plastic surgeons. They just seem to be, much more independent. I think part of it is their ego. They don't feel like they need to be involved with another individual. A lot of them are single provider groups, whereas, derm groups have always had, for the most part, more so than, and a larger group, but derms are a much larger group, 15 or 16,000 US. They're used to being in collaboration with other dermatologists within their practice, and, the specialties of Mohs and medical and aesthetic and so forth lends itself to collaboration. So collaborating with other practices, I wouldn't call it natural, but a hell of a lot more natural than plastics and facial plastics. But again, because of the non-surgical side and because of the scale economies and group purchasing and marketing and, other aspects, there is, the development of, management service organizations that are developing in the country. I'm dealing with one right now who's going across the country as we speak in plastic surgery. And the scale economies are good. And there are a bunch of people who, quite frankly, are getting to an age where they're ready to cash out and they don't have an exit strategy, which is amazing to me about turning the lights off after something that you've built equity and goodwill in after many, many years, and be willing to, to throw that asset, into the trash can without.
I can't agree with you. Can't agree with you more. I mean,
it's a struggle with plastic surgeons, and it's a big issue with ego, but it's coming. And I think if there are people, and I tell people, don't start considering selling, when you're already on the other side of the mountain and you're on the downstream.
I've been fascinated by this because I started out actually about 10 years ago. It's about 4 or 5 years after you and I spoke, and I have everything all set up and I could walk out tomorrow. But yet I have colleagues of mine who, have been working on this, and they come up to me at the meetings and they're like, I really need to pick your brain. Do you mind if I come visit? And we go out to dinner, and they're like, and by the way, they're 65, it's too late. Why do they wait? And there's a variety of reasons why I see my colleagues waiting. One of them is, as you mentioned, their ego. They can't, the thought of letting it go is a problem with them.
Or being second fiddle.
Yeah, and being second fiddle. And, so one of the things that I do, because, one of my former fellows joined us, he has equity in some of the business, and but I willingly give things up to him. And I've seen a lot of my colleagues have a real hard time feeling like they're being less relevant, and then the other part of it I've seen, because for the first many years I lived as like a small businessman, because I grew up in a family that was like, my dad was a scrapper. We never knew where the meal was coming. He had his own businesses. He ultimately ended up doing well, but we didn't live on everything that we make. And I see so many of my colleagues live on everything they make, and they get to that age and they still need to make a living every day.
Oh yeah.
So it's a slippery slope. And then all of a sudden, they don't have that drive that the 40-year-old or the 38-year-old has, and they start to chip away at their business. And the next thing you know, they wake up and they're 65 years old and their business is dwindling and they have nothing to sell.
Right.
So,
and then they have to face someone like me. And, that's not an easy due diligence to go through, because I'm already looking at it as a distressed sale.
It is a distress
I'm already discounting their profit. I'm already discounting their revenue growth. I'm already discounting the quality of their practice. And
it's
so,
too dependent on them. That's the thing. I mean, you private equity guys, you look at practice and you say, if everything is so dependent on the laying of hands of Dr. Williams, it's not worth anything.
Right. And they don't leverage themselves, and one of the tricks, and I don't give all my tricks away, but paying forward a little, I tell practices that you need to find yourself in a position of clearly being less than at least 50% of your revenue and profitability, and hopefully in the 15 to 20% area.
And that was always my goal. And that's what I'm at now. 15 to 20% of the revenue comes through my hands. The rest of it is, because I'm trying to become irrelevant. I mean, the more irrelevant I am, the more valuable it is, right?
Right, exactly. And being able to do other things for your vision and for your practice, looking out a year or two in terms of new technologies and new products. And there's some really exciting stuff out there, but it's all about specialization and having that unique proposition out there to be able to be sustainable.
Yeah. So in your opinion, who are going to be the winners and who are going to be the losers in the next 5 to 10 years?
Regarding
just providers. I mean,
well, I think the ones who are going to be the winners are the ones who have the wherewithal to be able to continue to ride the wave of increasing new technologies. There is some phenomenal technologies that are coming out. Some of them are not cheap and so forth, but they'll require an investment. It's not an investment so much in the products or the procedure as it is all of the marketing that you have to wrap around it. You have to do a business plan for every single component and every single provider and procedure that you do. This is a very granular exercise that needs to be, done in every practice and so on. So for those who are in a profitable position, have some appetite for risk taking, because there is you have to ride that initial wave, otherwise you'll be left in the wake of the boat. And I know you have a boat, and I think that if you have that wherewithal, you can continue to be, or at least strive to be, that go-to practice in your geo target, of new technologies, of new procedures, because that's what digital marketing, social media is. They don't talk about old stuff there. Everything is about, the new place to go to. So, Santorini, is the new Saint-Tropez to go to on Instagram. It's all over the place. And it's no different than some of the new technologies that are coming out. We see Cool Tone starting to get some lift out there. We see Jeuveau trying to get some lift out there. Revance was starting to get some lift out there. There are new wellness technologies that are starting to be integrated into the more advanced practices that are thinking a little further ahead. I mean, the one negative thing that we've had a hard time cracking in the aesthetics industry is that still almost 80% of the industry patients are female, and that's not what the population is about. And it's a hard thing to crack, getting.
You know what? I have, for the last 20 years, I've heard that the male population is growing. Guess what? It's bullshit.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's bullshit. But there are ways of getting to it. And one of the ways is to look at opportunities to, that doesn't impact their machismo, as I call it. And one of the areas is hair restoration. Hair restoration is, a great, what I call, entry point, because if a guy gets, whether it's PRP or PRF or other things like that, they'll be able to
completely agree.
They'll be able to start looking at their forehead, start looking at their other wrinkles. Maybe they'll do some body work or other things like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities, but in wellness, where, there isn't this machismo thing, guys who are getting older, they want to live longer. They may go
a lot of other things they want to do too.
Life changes that they want to do, exactly. That, they find themselves in new relationships, want to be both physically and, and quite frankly, sexually active, and not be a doorstopper or sedentary or a couch potato and so forth. And so there's some really exciting things. And, a lot of the aesthetic practices that I'm working with, the advanced ones, have already moved into wellness because it's that look good, feel good. Inevitably you'll hear that story. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for making me look good as much. I wish I felt as good as you've made me look. And then you start the ping pong game. You can send them down the hall to see an age management doctor for testosterone or,
right. And there's some challenges there. I mean, for example, in New York State, doctors can't compound, you got to go to compounding pharmacy. So it's hard for them to make it make sense on paper. But I want to ask you one last question before I let you go. So in the last 35 years in this industry, what one thing surprised you the most when it occurred that you were like, holy shit, I can't believe that happened? Or is there one, not one?
Yeah, there's the one, and maybe it's just my, I kind of think of myself sitting on the moon, looking back at the earth and so forth. It is amazing how many opportunities are out there that people that are right in front of their face said that they don't see. I was in, and the quick story, I came to a city and they had a 25,000 university campus. And I said, "You ever go over there and tap on, any opportunities over there?" No, we just left them alone. We started a development. It's now 60% of their practice. It's just, and maybe I'm looking at it from a different perspective. I think the thing that continues to surprise me is the level of myopia. I ask people to open their mind. They have to think out of the box these days with commoditization going on and everything. And there's some really exciting opportunities out there for all of us to take advantage of. This aesthetic industry is going to continue to grow. We're still at the tip of the iceberg. We're moving into wellness. There are things like exosomes. There are new skincare products. There are new dermatological sunscreen products, for specialties, whether it's for yacht clubs or for anything else. I mean, there's some really exciting things that are coming out. Companies are reinvesting into the development of new laser technologies like plasma and other things. So I'm very, very excited about the next 10 years, but you've got to sit back and you've got to plan this out, because if you don't know where you're going, any road's going to take you there.
Yeah. And, I think that because of the Affordable Care Act, and because, this is going to continue to be a pressure cooker, and those who are running a better business are going to win. And those who are just responding or trying to market themselves busy are not, they're going to lose, because you have got to run a better business. It's just too competitive. So with that, with change, there's opportunity, but it's going to be a challenge. I'm going to have to, we're at the end of time. Lou, that has been awesome. I really enjoyed catching up with you the other day. I really appreciate your comments and insight. You've always been an icon to me. I've followed your career, and I appreciate you taking the time to get on.
Look forward. Let's do it again at some point.
Yeah, we do. So again, thanks again. Just kind of as a housekeeping item before we sign off here, the next podcast is on, and I'll come up with another topic there. to hear you weigh in, Lou. But the next topic is going to be, how to build a high performance team so that you can experience exponential growth. It's something that I didn't understand many years ago. I thought it was about me, talking about the ego thing, right? I realized it's not about me. It's about this amazing team that we have here. For those who want more information, get to dredwilliams.com. I've got blogs, I've got articles, I got all kinds of information. And we will have out in a couple of months, The White Coat Entrepreneur, which is a book that I published everything from how to change your mindset to become a business person through to how to build your succession and exit your practice. So again, thanks so much again, Lou. Thank you, Equa Marketing, who hosted this free podcast. And I hope you guys all have an awesome evening.